To conclude or to resume this part of our conversation, I just want to ask you one short question about the peacemakers. There are a lot of countries that propose their help in peacemaking, and among them it's China, Brazil, Hungary, and even Indonesia lately. They proposed a ceasefire and went to the negotiation table. But underlines the position of President Zelensky and our government and our society in this situation. I just wanted to ask you what really of this country could be a peace negotiator or a real help in this situation to negotiate with Russia, and with which tools they can influence Russia, if there are any countries that can really help in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that I have to be careful in answering because, for example, Indonesian-Russian relations are not my forte. Let me just say a few things. I think one point that we've already covered is that it's very hard to see any kind of negotiations being very productive at the moment when Russia is refusing to accept sort of basic aspects of Ukraine's position, which is in accordance with international law, and is asking to keep the benefits of its aggression, so essentially to pay no penalty or to concede nothing of substance. Any kind of proposal that involves legitimating that position is really not constructive, right? So any government can say anything, but if their position is that they're presenting themselves as mediators while leaving the door open for Russia to do that, then they're really de facto helping Russia. There may be, even now, opportunities for constructive mediation on certain very limited matters, such as the so-called grain deal, which Russia has, I think, again, begun to abrogate or indicated that it wishes to abrogate, right? So that would be an opportunity for countries that are, to show that they are acting in good faith, countries that rely on grain exports from Ukraine to intervene in a diplomatic manner, to play a constructive role in alleviating the suffering generated by Putin's war. When the time comes for real negotiations, there may be also a role for countries that are distanced from the conflict, right? So one could argue that in a future situation in which Russia has been defeated on the battlefield and is wishing to negotiate about the end of sanctions, a country like Indonesia, for example, might be an appropriate sort of one appropriate mediator. But even there, I think one has to ask, I have noticed that President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have been very moderate in the way they respond to even very outrageous statements or behavior by, say, South African or Brazilian or Indian officials, right? They don't lash out in anger and say this is outrageous. And I understand that they are engaged in diplomacy and they wish to maintain cordial relations with these governments and try to solidify their relations with them. At the same time, you and I, as observers, it doesn't seem to me anyway that if a leader such as, say, President Lula da Silva of Brazil is presenting positions that are highly anti-Ukrainian and effectively pro-Russian, well, I don't see that a person like that or the government that he leads has an obvious role to play as a mediator. And a mediator has to be somebody who is genuinely acting from a position of goodwill toward both parties and not seeking to advantage one of the parties or to disadvantage the other one. So that would seem to be an important principle to bear in mind with all these governments, that they should not be allowed to present themselves as mediators while they're actually essentially supporting Russia. So
you say we have a right to be a little more rough towards the rhetoric of such pro-Russian politicians?
I think that Ukraine is fighting for its survival and using all the tools at its disposal, including diplomatic ones. So what I said was not meant as a criticism of the Ukrainian government, and I'm not in a position to comment on what their reasoning is. I certainly understand why Ukraine feels that it cannot afford to alienate any potential partners right now. But I am not constrained by that, right? So I can say that it doesn't seem to me that a country, say China, let's just take China, I think is the most clear-cut example, that China is clearly Russia's ally, right? The idea that China, which is also articulating a position that does not require Russian troops to leave Ukraine for a peace agreement, well, it's hard to see how anybody could think that Ukraine should accept that kind of role for China, right? I mean, maybe it's not to Ukraine's advantage to say that so openly. Maybe there are ways in the future in which Chinese participation could be linked to participation of other countries that are more friendly to Ukraine, such as Canada, the UK, France, right, other NATO countries. But I'm simply making a point that it is very disingenuous for the government of China to present itself as a kind of a neutral party when it is obvious to everybody that it is an ally of Russia with which it is engaged in a very close security and economic relationship, and when its own positions on the invasion of Ukraine have been essentially pro-Russian. So I think it's fair for all of us to hold governments to a standard of evaluating their behavior and seeing whether it makes them suitable for the roles they claim to want to pursue. And in the case of China and some of these other governments, it's just they should not be treated as neutral, benevolent mediators when they're clearly interested in preserving Russia's, in supporting Russia.